Coming up in the Authorpreneur podcast. Welcome to the 100th episode of the Authorpreneur podcast. Welcome to the Authorpreneur podcast. I'm your host, mystery author Amelia D. Hay. On this podcast, I will bring you writing, book marketing, and self-publishing advice so that you can create your dream author business, build your author platform, and be creatively independent. You can find the episode show notes and lots more information on the podcast page at authorpreneurpodcast.com/podcast. Hello, writers. Honestly, I can't believe I've made it this far. It's mind-blowing. I know that's cliche, but it's how I feel when I see that episode number. But let's just say it's been a wild ride. A ride that is not yet over, and I'm glad I stuck with podcasting through those difficult times. And I've dabbled with a few great interviews and had my first ever guests. It's been both challenging and fun all at once. In the spirit of celebrating the 100th episode milestone, I'm going to answer the top questions asked by my blog readers, YouTube subscribers, podcast listeners, and questions asked through my Ask a Question form on my website. As I prepared the notes for this episode, I decided to not include the names of the people asking the questions, and in many cases I've also reworded the question asked because it contained details about the person's story idea or current work in progress. In a few cases, I decided not to reword the question because it needs a little bit of background information to provide an answer that makes sense. In a nutshell, I'm trying to respect the privacy of the people coming to me for advice. This decision comes from a background as a life and business coach and the coach and client confidentiality agreement. However, in saying that, on my Ask a Question form, I do point out that I will share the answer both with them through email and in a public forum like my blog, YouTube channel, or podcast. I think the anonymity I provide gives people the freedom to ask those questions that can often feel too silly to ask. Quite often you get scared to ask because you believe it most likely has a simple answer, but it's not clear to you. Anyway, I hope all of that makes sense for you. So let's get into the questions. If you're interested in reading the transcript or would like links to anything that I've mentioned in the show, then check out the very long blog post or edited transcript at authorpreneurpodcast.com/100th-episode. And if you're new to this podcast, I want to say a huge thank you for stopping by and trying out my show. To those of you who've been faithfully listening, thank you for regularly listening in and supporting me. Your support means more to me than you know. So the first question is, how do I turn a page of notes, approximately 637 words, into a story? Sorry, but you're not going to like my answer. It depends on what the notes are and how much information you need in order to get started. You could either start outlining by fleshing out the major plot points of the story. After that, if you're still stuck and can't move forward, you can flesh out the scenes in between those points. Or if you have like an idea for the opening scene in mind, you could just start discovery writing and open up your computer and just write the story and just let whatever comes out come out. I know that's not really helpful, but I have quite a few episodes of my podcast and other resources that can help you figure out what process will work best for you in this situation. So during this season of the podcast, I created a series on outlining that spanned through the following episodes. So it's episode TAP033, 034, 35, 36, and 37. And I'll include links to those in the show notes and over on the blog post on my website. So those are the ones I'm outlining. So it's TAP033 through to TAP037. So far, I've only published one episode on discovery writing, and that episode number is TAP043. I did publish episode TAP044 where I talked about the feedback I got from my editor, but that's not necessarily going to help you with discovery writing. It's just the feedback that I got and whether or not, my editor noticed a change in my writing style. If you are interested in discovery writing and writing without an outline, there is a book and it's called Writing into the Dark by Dean Wesley Smith, and you can find it on Amazon, and I think it's available in ebook. And again, I'll leave the URL is just too long to read out to you, so I'll include a link to that in the description on the YouTube video if you're watching, in the podcast show notes, and over in the blog post as well. If you prefer a course, I do think the same information that's in the book is in the course, but I feel like the course is better. I guess that's just my personal preference. And that course is called Writing into the Dark, and it's by WMG Publishing, and Dean Wesley Smith hosts the course, and obviously he owns WMG Publishing. So the website you need to find that is just WMG-publishing-workshops- and lectures.teachable.com. And if you just type in Writing into the Dark into the search bar, you should be able to find it. But a full link to that course is available in the show notes, YouTube description, and over in my blog post. So the second question is, should you self-publish an ebook, paperback, and audiobook all on the same launch date or separate? I remember when I first started, I was a bit overwhelmed, and I just didn't want to wait to publish all of those things together, so I just published the ebook first. And looking back, I do think that was a good decision. Obviously, I recommend publishing the ebook first. Then once you're certain you're happy with the story and there are no plot issues pointed out by readers or mistakes made in like formatting, and there's a whole host of other things that go wrong, you're better off publishing the ebook first. Things are missed in the proofreading stage. It happens. You can then perfect those things and then go on and publish the paperback and other versions of the books. Obviously, with my first book, I had plot issues. One ebook, I pushed it out to ARC readers, and someone pointed out to me that there was a duplicate version of a chapter, and I don't know what happened between the exporting and the formatting. The exporting from Scrivener and the formatting into Vellum. I don't know if that was a mistake that I made or there was an error with the programs, because it happens and I didn't notice. Luckily, I didn't upload. I figured it out before I uploaded it onto Amazon and the stores. But because it's your first book, you probably won't have a lot of people waiting for it. So making mistakes really early on with the ebook, it isn't really a big deal. As long as you haven't started promoting it. Although I guess it is a big deal because you can get negative book reviews because of these things, but you're better off publishing the ebook first so you don't have it permanently in print with the paperback. And I've never published audio, so I really want to publish audiobooks because that's how I love to read, but it's just not on the cards at the moment. The next question is, do I need separate ISBNs for a paperback novel published through KDP Print and Ingram Spark? Some people say you need separate ISBNs, while others say you can use the same one. I'm a little confused, and I've noticed that you use the same ISBN, and I'm wondering why. So when I publish a paperback, I'll be clear on what it is. Like, I'm just gonna pull out a copy of one of my books for the video. This is the 5.5 by 8.5 paperback large print edition, and this is the one that's published to KDP because it's got that. This is the author copy, and it's got that line through it. But there's another version of this that's exactly the same, and that has been distributed to Ingram Spark, and I've used the same ISBN for the KDP version of this and for the Ingram Spark because they're exactly the same. There's nothing different about these editions. Like, I've just created two copies. I will say that this is getting really nitpicky, but the covers are slightly different in terms of dimensions because for some reason, I think it's to do with, maybe it's the paper, but for some reason the cover dimensions for Ingram Spark are slightly different to the cover dimensions for KDP. Even though they use the same printers, they are just different. And I know this because I designed all of my covers, and I design covers for other people, and I often will get different file. I'll get both templates together when someone has a paperback cover with their ebook cover. So they're different for some reason. So that's the only difference, is that I think it's the spine width is slightly different. And I'm talking like millimeters. It's almost not worth mentioning, but the content inside of it that the ISBN is really attached to is, it's attached to the cover, but the content is exactly the same. There's nothing different about it. So yeah, so that's why I use the same ISBN. I have a funny feeling maybe Ingram might prefer you to use separate, but I've never had any issues. So what I will do is I will only use expanded distribution for Ingram Spark. I will not put my book, when I upload my paperback to KDP, to the KDP dashboard, I will only sell that version on the Amazon stores, and then I will go to Ingram Spark and distribute it everywhere else there. But when you distribute a book through Ingram Spark, it will eventually end up on Amazon. It's something that I can't stop. If I could go through and click, don't send this to Amazon, then I would, but you can't sort of go down and decide where you want books to be distributed to. It's just something that naturally happens. I think from memory, I upload to Ingram Spark first, and then I do KDP print second. Possibly. I can't actually remember. Sometimes I've screwed up and I've done it the other way around. I've gone to KDP first and then Ingram second, but I've never had a problem with it. So that's how I use ISBNs. So the next question is it okay to post an unpublished novel on your blog? And I know why you're suggesting this, because some people say to do this and others say don't, because they don't understand how blogging works, and I won't get into that. But yeah, you can do what you want with your books, but just be aware that if you enroll this book into KDP Select or Kindle Unlimited, then you will need to take these posts down. But if you're uploading your book everywhere, it won't matter. But I can sort of see the sense in you uploading a book to your blog, especially if you want to sort of test out the market and see how people respond to it. But if you're going to do that, you have to direct traffic to those blog posts and then encourage people to sign up to get the rest of the book as you write it. Otherwise, you need to find a reason for people to sign up so you can continue talking to them and build that relationship on your blog. That's a really important part of blogging, actually. I have ordered these the next question is kind of related to that, which is why I've put it this way, but they didn't come in this order. So it is, I've heard blogging is dead. Is this true? And is it worth doing as a fiction author? I can see the value for nonfiction authors, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the topic. I must admit, when I saw this question come into me, and I've been sitting on it for a bit, and I'm sorry, but I was super thrilled because this is, just one of my soapboxes. Actually, it's like a 2-for-1 soapbox for me. And I'm just so sick of hearing this. Not the question, but the first 4 words. But just that phrase, blogging is dead. And I'm sick of hearing it. It's every time I hear someone that's saying blogging is dead, I immediately know that they don't know what they're talking about. And I know that sounds really harsh, but it's true. Usually what they're saying is they've been using the same blogging techniques since 2008 and it's no longer working. And, surprise, the Google algorithm has evolved and changed and it's become smarter as people have understood how they can use artificial intelligence and search and stuff like that. But back to the topic, blogging is a long-term strategy that heavily relies on good search engine optimization practices. On top of this, competition for eyeballs on your website is fierce. Therefore, you need to captivate, entertain, give the reader what they're looking for, all while being unique. And you need to promote your blog posts in order to get eyeballs on your work. I alluded to this earlier, but please ignore anyone who tells you they know what the algorithm wants and why it favors certain things. There are only 4 people in Google that actually know what the algorithm is. Sure, the engineers that work for the Google search part of the business probably have a really good understanding of how it works, but they don't know for sure. And none of those people are talking to SEO gurus. It would cost them their job and potentially their career in the tech industry, especially if it was found out that they leaked information to this, because who would want to work with you after that if you leaked confidential information to bloggers in the tech world while you were working for this really famous company? No one would be willing to flush their career down the toilet because of that. So Google does provide basic tips on how you can do this in their business profile help section. Just be aware that all other advice about ranking high on Google comes from educated guesses, not insider knowledge. So when someone says, the classic thing I've heard lately is that Google search decides that your blog posts are good quality based on how long someone spends on your website. And this isn't true either. It's because I can have a web page. What I regularly do actually is I'll be looking for information. I'll have web pages up, and then I'll be reading, and then I'll decide that I want to get up and go make a cup of tea, right? And that'll take me maybe 5 minutes. I'll sit there and wait for it to infuse. So that's another 4 minutes. That's 9 minutes. By the time I get back to my desk, that's 12 minutes gone. That doesn't mean the blog post that I was on is suddenly great content, because it's a lot of info. It's to do with a lot of things. Like, a lot of things are going to make your blog appear better. And these are educated guesses. I don't know this for sure, but obviously the age of your site and whether you're creating good quality content. In the past, people, and some people probably still do this, they keyword stuff blog posts to the point where it's not useful. So I think if you're going to blog, you need to create content that's great quality. It reads well. It does what it says on the tin, because that's what's going to keep somebody on that page. Whereas if you I think keyword stuffing is easier to do with nonfiction. Like, if I was to say creating a blog post on how to publish a novel with KDP, and my long tail keyword was publish a novel with KDP, and I place that a lot of times through the blog post, sure, that's great. It's not, but you better make sure that you do actually go through and you actually are providing those steps on how to do it. Like, someone could follow your blog post and do the thing that you're telling them what to do. Like, they should be able to follow it in that way. And that's how nonfiction works. But if you're writing fiction, for the love of God, don't clickbait, because people are going to leave your site. And I think someone spending a short amount of time on your website, or many people spending a short amount of time on your website, probably isn't going to look good. But it's not just one thing. It's not just how long someone spends on your website. It's many, many different things. And I have a funny feeling there's going to come a time where that algorithm might be able to actually read your blog post. So if you're looking for like this quick strategy on how to, rank high, those days are over, of keyword stuffing and creating low bar quality content. So you're better off creating good content, but not too long. Like, I'm really waffling and I'm not doing myself any favors, but I do think it's really important that you don't just aim for like long content or short content. You aim for whatever word count the content needs for it to be valuable, and valuable for the reader is more important than anything else. And I think that's what you need to value over doing all of these tactics. And like I said earlier, blogging is a long-term strategy. It might take years for you to rank before you start ranking well in Google, especially high up. Some people can do it quite quickly, but you want to aim for consistently pushing out content, which is something I'm not good at, and quality. Consistency and quality. But consistency doesn't mean like every other day. If you publish, 2 blog posts a month, make sure that you're consistently publishing 2 blog posts a month over time and that you don't sort of stray from that. It's a lot of things that you need to do well. I do recommend that if you are considering going into blogging, a blog I like to follow, it's called Pro Blogger, and it's by an Australian, and he talks about blogging best practices, and you need to be aware that blogging has evolved over time. Technically, what I'm doing right now is a form of how blogging has evolved. And he does keep up with the best practices and how blogging has evolved over the years. So I really recommend, if you want to get into this and do it right, then you need to follow him and obviously think about how you can use these techniques as an author, because he doesn't talk about blogging for writers. He's just talking about blogging in general. So just know there are no shortcuts. So write great content that's helpful and entertaining. So if you create a top 10 books with amateur sleuths, that you provide this and give more information than just book descriptions pulled from Amazon. Make it your own. Read all of the books and have something interesting to say without spoiling plot. You need to give it an interesting twist. And what sets you apart from everyone else, this is going to sound really corny, is you and your opinion. And this is going to separate you from content written by other people and content that's written by artificial intelligence. If you've heard something useful in this episode that was helpful to you and you'd like to support the show, then buy me a coffee for as little as $2 at buymeacoffee.com/author ADH. Is it better to wait until you have more than one book in a series before you publish first? It's funny that you asked this, because this is something that I wanted to do before I started and distributing my books to all of the ebook retail platforms. On the surface, this may seem like great advice, especially when you consider paid advertising, read-through, and some readers being reluctant to read books in an incomplete series. That reluctance you'll often see it in the fantasy genre, where authors will take a very long time between books and they won't start reading until the series is finished, just in case the author dies and the series goes incomplete forever. They will never know the end of the story, and that's why they do that. And I think it is some readers that do apply this to series where you can read the books as standalone, but I digress. But there's more to publishing than paid advertising. Your first book is a learning curve. I guarantee you'll make mistakes and you'll grow as a writer thanks to the feedback you'll get from readers. Now consider if you want to be making those beginner mistakes in your first 2 or 3 books, especially if they are in a series. So probably not, right? Based upon my experience, it's better to publish that first book knowing that you may need to release a second edition later on in the future after you've published more books, than to have 3 books with the same mistakes. And this is the danger, right? Because you don't know what you don't know until you make the mistake and you realize, oh, I should have done it this way. Because you do really evolve over time as a writer. Who you are as a writer before you publish your first book is going to be very different to book 5. Like, I've grown a lot between my first book and my book 5. I really do think that you should just publish the first book, see how readers react to it, and then go on to write the second, also while learning the craft of writing from other more seasoned writers, whether it's through courses or books. I would stay wary of someone or a course or people who promise to teach you how to write a bestseller, because I do think bestsellers it's a combination of a few things. One part is timing of both when you publish a book, and maybe you publish something at a time when this particular story will be more receptive. So you can't plan for that. And I do think part of it is luck. Obviously, part of it is writing a great story, and that's important. But I would just steer clear of people who promise you that, because I don't think it's something you can promise someone. It's really, to me, I do side-eye that because you can't promise that. It's just, it feels very scammy, but I digress. So I would recommend you publish your first book and then go on to write the next books in the series, knowing that the first book is a huge learning curve. So the next question is, when discovery writing, how do you ensure that all the scenes and chapters you write move the story forward and not end up being wasted words that are deleted during revisions? So what I'm about to say to you, I'm saying in the back of deciding not to publish a book that is, it's sitting at 100K and I've decided not to publish it. So I don't think wasted words should be a concern, because a scene that enables you to figure out the story but doesn't make it into the final version of your story is still helpful and important. Just because something doesn't contribute to the final word count doesn't mean it's not necessary or it's somehow a waste. But a rule of thumb I use when discovery writing is something needs to happen in every scene that moves the story forward, whether it's a character moment that helps the reader connect to the character. Obviously that moment needs to fit in with your story, or it's placing an obstacle in the main character's path. You get it. Something needs to happen. And I had this epiphany while writing The Locked Room, and I went from James witnessing a fight and then me realizing I need to introduce this character. And as I was writing the scene, I realized this is boring. I need to do something. So I threw in a gun just laying on top of this person's bag. And I thought this introduces them as a potential suspect, because why would you be in England with a gun in your purse going to a bed and breakfast? You know, that it does sort of throw a spanner into the story a little bit, and something interesting is happening. It's no longer just someone checking in. It's, you know, he sees a gun in their bag and thinks, whoa, you know, because this is not something that you see regularly in the United Kingdom. So you get it. Something needs to happen. See, the scene needs to exist for a reason, and it needs to stand on its own by having a beginning, middle, and an end. And that's something that I learned as well. It's, don't take the arrive late, leave early thing too literally. You do need to set the scene, and you need to point the reader to what's going to happen next without giving it away. So you either explain the transition, have them contemplating on what's happening, or whatever, but you need to wrap the scene up so you can read it on its own. But also you need to build intrigue so they read the next scene, right? There's a lot of things you need to do, but you need to find a way of doing that all together. So the next question is, how do I know when it's time to finish revising and start working with an editor? Usually when I write a novel to an outline, I reach a point in the revision process where I can't bear to work on my story any longer. This happens a few times, I'll admit, but there's a point where I can't even bribe myself. At one stage with Duplicity, I was bribing myself with chocolate. Like, I was saying that, you know, if I reach this point in the final revision of this book, then I'll have a piece of chocolate in the fridge. And they were special chocolate. They were special pieces of chocolate. They were expensive. And I think I got to the midpoint and I was struggling, because that book, I did a rewrite. I wrote it, realized that I made mistakes to do with the realism of the story. And it's important with the mystery genre. So I rewrote it. And then I did a revision after that. I did a few revisions after that. I think I did 2. And that last revision was hell. And I got to the midpoint and the chocolate didn't work. And I just powered through that last 50% of the story. And it was difficult. Like, bribing didn't help, but I needed to do it. But that's a rewrite. It's very different. So at some point, I just feel done with the book. And I sort of see working with an editor as exciting. Like, I start feeling like I look forward to the feedback from somebody else. Like, I need this book to be someone else's problem for a while. And that's usually when I start working with an editor. The more you write, you will get a feel for when the time is right for you to start working with an editor. And I know that's super cliche, but there are no hard and fast rules. But just be aware that the earlier you engage an editor, the more expensive it will cost. So if you get to a point where you feel like you can't keep going on, you might want to, I don't know, maybe find a paid beta reader, try and find some good quality feedback, especially if you're concerned that you might be hiring an editor too soon. But just be aware that the sooner you hire an editor in the process, the more it's going to cost. So the next question is, can you recommend an editor to me? So the short answer is no. I really don't want to get into the business of recommending editors, because finding an editor it's like dating. And I know that's, again, like this entire episode's been full of cliches, right? So what works for me in terms of editing probably might not work for you. The best thing to do is to search online for the type of editor that you need and then send a request for a sample edit. I highly recommend selecting a piece of your manuscript from the middle, because usually this is the most raw piece of writing in a book and you'll get more of an accurate quote from the editor. But be wary of editors who don't use track changes, because this is industry standards, like track changes in Word or track changes in, I think this is something Atticus is going to do in the future. I'm not sure if it's actually available yet, but whether it's track changes in another program that you use, it's really important that this is the industry standard. You shouldn't get just like a clean manuscript back. You should see all the changes and be able to decide whether you want to apply them for yourself or not. And editing is not a collaborative process. Usually the editor will go through and they'll say, these are the errors that you've made. Through the track changes, they will either make the change and then you have to go through and select and approve it or choose your original version. And sometimes they will add notes saying, wanting more clarification. So it's not a true collaborative process. You're working with, they're almost like teaching you how to write better in a way. So it's not a collaboration in that respect. You're really learning from an editor, if that makes sense. So just be wary of that. And also, if an editor doesn't share qualifications or is reluctant to share qualifications, like a teaching degree in English, like an English teacher's degree, is not a qualification for editing. Make sure that this person has done some type of course or courses on line editing, copy editing, content editing, proofreading, those kind of things. A more English literature degree is probably going to give someone an idea of story structure, so they might be more qualified to be a developmental editor if that's the kind of thing you're after. But if you aren't sure whether an editor is qualified, either move on or ask for their qualifications, but just be really wary if they're reluctant to give you this information, because that's a red flag. But moving right along, the next question is, I've grown tired of revising my first novel and want to move forward and start editing, but I don't know if I'm actually ready or just sick of revising. And what type of editor do I need? For instance, do I need developmental editing? It's very expensive and I'm not sure if I can afford to spend that much money or even make that much money back after I start selling that first book. Sorry, I just had to fill in the question because it's not quite complete. I think perhaps this person ran out of words. So instead of using a developmental editor, you might want to consider using like a paid beta reader or two instead of a developmental editor. I recommend using more than one beta reader. The reason I suggest using a paid beta reader instead of a free one found on Reddit or Goodreads is usually a professional or a paid beta reader will have a list of criteria they look for as they read, and they often leave notes on the manuscript using comments in Word. I find these inline comments valuable because you get, I guess, a reader's initial reaction to your work. After this, you might want to make any revisions and then hire a line editor and a proofreader. It's really important that these two editors are different people. I do prefer line editing over copy editing because I feel like a line edit is really more in depth, whereas a copy edit, it's as in depth. And I've realized I actually don't like copy editing. I prefer to see all of these, like a multitude of track changes, than like a sparse manuscript with only a few, because I feel like more work has been done to improve the quality of the writing. That's just me. And one last tip, I recommend that you that you read the manuscript through between each of these edits and after the proofread before you start the publishing process, because sometimes in the light editing process, occasionally I've seen like a sentence change in a way that I didn't want it to change, and it's easier to pick up on it if you read it through, or you get something like natural readers to read it through to you, which is usually what I do, and I can hear things that aren't quite right. It happens, but I do think using these products will actually help create a better manuscript. It's especially helpful if you read the manuscript through before you start formatting and pressing publish. And if you're considering using a paid beta reader, I would probably do a search in, obviously, a search engine like Google, or go to somewhere like Fiverr and just read through the reviews before you purchase. Obviously, send them an email and ask them what kind of things do they look for, whether they're open to answering specific questions about your manuscript as they read it before you hire, and just make sure that you're going to get, because I've used Fiverr and on the occasion you'll get writing suggestions, and I really hate that. What I want is feedback from a reader's point of view, whether a reader notices plot holes and things like that, and what genre they feel the story fits into. Whereas I don't want, if something goes wrong or a reader feels that something's not right, that's fine. What I don't want is them to tell me how to fix it. I just want them to point out where they feel the story doesn't make sense, they're unsure about something, stuff like that. I know it's very vague, but I'm tired and I can't think of what I want in a beta read. It's bizarre, but I would create a list of what you want, the type of feedback you want, and double check that you're actually going to get that before you hire anybody. And again, I don't want to recommend someone, because I might recommend my favorite beta reader to you and you might hate them. You may think, oh, I really don't like this. So I think it is best that you go and search and you find these things for yourself instead of relying on other people to tell you these people are great, because that may not be the case. That may not work well for you. And I think you should vet people for yourself. You shouldn't rely on other organizations to vet these professionals. I think you should ask other authors who they use, get a long list, use Google, look for reviews, look at both the positive and negative reviews if you can find them, and do your own research, because I think this puts you in the driver's seat and helps you make the best decision instead of relying on other people to do it for you. I think it is better to do it yourself, obviously. So the next question is, how long did it take for you to get consistent book sales when publishing wide? I've only got 2 books published and I get 0 sales unless I set my books to free or 99 cents, then use promotion sites like the Fuzzy Librarian. I know this is a cheeky thing to ask, but you seem pretty open about money topics and book sales stats. I've obviously been quite transparent about that in the past. So I'm not sure if I can technically call what I'm experiencing as consistent sales. So the short answer is I'm yet to find out. And now for the long answer, because with me, there's always a long answer, right? So in 2020, I published my first book, which I later revised twice. Once to fix a plot issue, the second to change the ending because I wrote myself into a corner. So in 2020, in July, I published The Lawn. That same year, in January, I actually published the first edition of Missing. In July of 2021, I published the 3rd edition of Suspicion. I can't believe it's been that long. In October 2021, I published The Candidate. So I've got The Lawn, Suspicion, The Candidate. In October 2022, I listed Suspicion for free, and this was a month before I published Duplicity. So I've got 4 books: The Lawn, Suspicion, The Candidate, Duplicity. And then in April 2023, I published The Locked Room, and this was book 5. Since January of this year, I've been getting consistent book sales per month without any advertising. And I'm excluding free downloads in this. I'm just purely for books that have a price and someone's clicked and they've purchased it. I think this is because of a few things. First, I write in a series and all books that I've published exist in the same world and have the same protagonist, but they're not all a part of the same series. The second thing that's worthy of note is I publish in multiple formats. So ebook, paperback, large print paperback for every story. My first in series is set as perma-free. And lastly, I published 5 books in the same story universe with the same main character. I think the sales I'm receiving now are due to the fact that I've built up a following over the years on Amazon. It's currently, when I wrote the script for this, it was sitting at 85. So I've checked since and it's different. And it's the number of followers I have increased for a reason. And I don't want to talk about that right now because I want to exclude that data from this because that's a result of a paid promotion. I'm talking about me doing absolutely nothing and getting consistent sales. On top of this, I kept publishing books and I've reached book 5. So I'm more discoverable than when I was after my first 2, but barely. It's still early days. So I'm guessing that the more books I publish, the better it will get. When looking at sales, you also need to consider the economic climate as well. Not only are there more books waiting to be found, but money is tight for many people right now. So reading has become a luxury. It's sad, but it's true to a certain degree. There are people that buy lots of books because this is their hobby, whereas I do think the economic climate has something to do with it, especially if you're in Europe, because there's, a bit of a war going on our doorstep. You have the current political and economic climate. So don't be down on your sales, especially after a second book when you're publishing wide. Keep going and make sure that your next book is better than the last. So my sales, the other thing I didn't mention is when I published Duplicity and The Candidate, I think I just published the ebook and maybe the first paperback and a paperback. I eventually published the paperback for The Candidate later, and that was just the regular paperback. I've since gone through, and I think it was in March, actually, I went and I started putting out large print editions, so it was one more product, and that made it more discoverable. I think has also contributed, because I've also started getting some of these sales figures, and they're very tiny, from physical books. Amelia from the future here. As I was listening to one of the numerous playbacks that I do during the editing of the video and the audio, I realized I'd made a mistake and I'm going to correct it. So the book stats I'm about to share with you relate to sales on Amazon only and not the other stores. Since March, I've been regularly getting reads on Kobo Plus for Duplicity, funnily enough, but not my first in series. So I think maybe people got my first in series for free, because it's free on Kobo, it's free everywhere. And then they've gone on to read Duplicity through Kobo Plus in Canada. So I've got those reads, but technically they're not sales, so I haven't included them. Also, the free downloads I've been consistently getting from Amazon, Kobo, Smashwords, Barnes & Noble, and Google Play are also not included. So these are just the regular book sales that I'm getting on Amazon and nowhere else. I'm not sure when I wrote the script why I didn't consider pointing this out, but I didn't. Anyway, here are the book stats. So in March, I sold 6 books. This is obviously excluding free downloads. And what was I going to say? I've done no advertising for a very long time. So March was 6, April was 9, May, prior to, because I did some paid promotion at the end of this month. At the end of May, I had 4 sales that were outside of that paid promotion. So that these are just organic sales, and they're not pretty, but I think they're happening because I've got more products out. I've got more variation of those same products, and they're just organic sales. I think if I pushed money into promoting these books, I probably might make more consistent sales. But I've only got 5 books out. One of them's a short story. 2 of them are novella sized, one is a short novel, and one is a full-length novel. I sort of think at this stage maybe me doing paid promotion might not be worth it. The promotion I did at May was to test out a theory that I was having, like a pricing tactic to see if it would work, but I'll talk about that in another episode. So my sales aren't fantastic either, but I'm noticing, and I didn't really track what I was selling before January of this year. I did get a few sales when I first launched Duplicity and the candidate, but they were very few and they weren't worth mentioning. But between book launches, between Duplicity and sort of March, I had no sales because I wasn't putting anything out, if that makes sense. I know those sales figures aren't glamorous, and I don't know, it is a bit, I'm trying not to have any feelings about my own book sales. I know that sounds ridiculous. I don't want to place too much importance on these low figures because I only have 5 books and they're not all, they might be in the same universe, but they're all different sizes. They're not a part of the same series technically. And I'm trying not to fixate on this and give it too much importance, because what's more important is I write my next book and I start creating a backlist, which is why I feel weird for sharing the sales, but at the same time I think it's important to be realistic, and I don't want to say to myself, and you shouldn't either, I should be making more sales by now, because I don't think having that thought is helpful, and beating yourself up about it is either. I'm just accepting that this is what sales look like for me at this time. And hopefully as I get more books and I start promoting and figuring out how to promote my books well, that this will change. But right now, writing seems to be a better use of my time, if that makes sense. So that concludes this Ask Me Anything on writing, revision, editing, and self-publishing episode. If you have a question that you'd love to ask me relating to writing fiction or nonfiction, then come over to the blog post and fill out the form at authorpreneurpodcast.com/question. All questions answered in this show and on past and episodes that will occur in the future will be listed on the frequently asked questions page at authorpreneurpodcast.com question/FAQ. Again, I'll leave a link to that in the show notes, the description box underneath the video, and a link on the blog post page. So unless someone asks me a question through my Patreon account, those questions obviously will be listed privately, but any questions that I've answered in the past and during this one and in the future will be listed in this frequently asked questions page. So if you're curious about what I've answered in the past, then head on over there. So in the next episode, I'll discuss the anatomy of a scene. Actually, maybe I'll do the May behind the scenes podcast diary first, because I do have something to talk about and I haven't alluded to it in this, so maybe it's more fair on me to release that episode first before I start talking about the anatomy of a scene. Yeah, that makes sense. So thank you for watching, and happy reading and writing, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Authorpreneur podcast. If you love this episode, then hit the subscribe button and leave a review on your favourite podcasting app. I'm your host, Amelia D. Hay, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.